Have you ever lost a child? Do you know someone who has endured unimaginable pain from their loss? Have you simply met someone deep in grief, mourning their child's life? Whether by miscarriage, horrible accident, suicide, or disease, each loss leaves a hole in that mother's heart that really can't ever be healed. Today, we have the distinct and sobering pleasure of hearing from Ann Bercht, mother to 3 adult children, about her experience facing this loss, her advice to other mothers walking this lonely journey, and how she continues to look for God's presence in her moments of healing. You're listening to audio from University Baptist Church in Beaver Creek, Ohio. Our mission is to make wholehearted followers of Christ who know Him and make Him known. We recognize that Mother's Day is hard for many women and want mothers and women of all types to feel seen and encouraged by the church. I'm Kelcey Flynn, your host and fellow UBC member. On behalf of the women's ministry here at UBC, we hope you enjoy this motherhood mini-series and visit us at ubcbeavercreek.com for more information. Let's listen in. Well, Ann, I am so grateful that you've decided to join us today on our very first motherhood mini-series talking about all things motherhood. And I'm really grateful to have you joining us today and having the women of both of UBC and even wider, right, hear your story. And so I'd love for you to just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you spend your days.
All right, Kelcey. Well, thank you so much for having me. And it is a big topic, talking about, of course, how we lost a child. And so I do hope that the words that I share will just offer so much encouragement to something that is definitely scary for people. So what occupies my days? I have an unusual calling in my life. I am an affair recovery specialist, and I work together with my husband. It is our own business, and basically we spend our time rescuing marriages that are on the brink. And I always tell people that my mission in life is to make the world better by giving children parents who love each other. And so there's appointments with clients, there's marketing, webinars, courses that I run, as well as the managing aspects of the business. So that's all part of it. And then I am, of course, a mom, and I still have my 2 wonderful daughters, and I work very hard to be in their lives and focus on them. And then there's the absolute love of my life, my grandchildren. In fact, that's why I live here in Beaver Creek, because we moved to be close to my 3 youngest grandsons. And so any grandmother knows that is just the best part. And as some have said, the reward for not killing your children. So that's a big part of what I do. My husband and I love to cook together and host dinner parties. I am an avid reader. I love nature and hiking. And I love being part of UBC and just being part of a church that is so solid in the Word. And because my spiritual gift is teaching, I've been involved in UBC, both at teaching ladies' Bible studies, and also I teach UBC kids kindergarten through 5th grade. And they are amazing, such a rewarding part. So my life is very, very full.
Well, Ann, I'm just one, that's just a lot. I'm really impressed. But 2, you're such a seasoned mom. I mean, that is a lot of life experience to have 2 adult daughters, right? In total 3, right? Which we'll talk about today. But I'm just so grateful that the women that are at UBC and beyond, and even myself, right, get to hear stories from women like you, right, who have gone before us, right, and seen the good and the bad parts of motherhood, and that we get the opportunity to kind of talk about that today, which I would love for you to share your journey as a seasoned mom, and in particular, right, today we're talking about loss, right, so your very devastating experience of losing your son. So if you would just to kind of tell us a little bit about that and, kind of your journey.
Yeah. And I guess when you're talking about being a seasoned mom, maybe people would want to know just a little bit of background. I've been married 42 years, and my oldest daughter is 40. So And we were both Christians when we got married. So our kids were raised in the church. They were baptized. They went to Sunday school. We did all of the things. In fact, my husband and I sought mentors out when we were young, learning how to be good parents. And because I guess I have that teaching gift, that means I read a lot of books. And so parenting and all of that. So leading up to the day that my beautiful, wonderful, sweet son died, nothing really prepares you for a moment like that. And I guess for me, death seemed like something that was far away, something that happened to other people, not to people like us. I was really not very acquainted with, hadn't lost people close to me. I guess I had lost my father in 2015. My son died in 2017. But my dad was 91 and he'd lived a long life, and he was suffering the last couple of years. And so it was almost a relief in some ways when he was set free. That's a totally different scenario. And I remember the last time I saw my son, and he had been over working on a woodworking project with my husband in the garage. And then we had a bite to eat. And when he left, I gave him a great big hug, just like I always did. No idea this was on the horizon. And I said, "I love you, son." And he always hugged really good back. And he said, "I love you too, Mom." And I said, "And I'm really proud of you." And that was how I usually said goodbye to my son, which I'm incredibly thankful for. And it's an encouragement for others that, I would never want anyone to listen to this podcast and feel afraid and God doesn't want us to be afraid. But the truth of the matter is we don't know what tomorrow holds. And so be kind. Make sure you don't leave on say goodbye on a bad note. Think about that. And because I think that my grief journey would have been a very difficult journey if it would have been something different than that. And I have to acknowledge the large range of different grief journeys moms would go on.
Right.
So that was the last time. And the next day was Saturday, the day before Mother's Day. And something I've wrestled with a little bit also along this whole journey is that, you hear sometimes stories of somebody who has a premonition that something's wrong or feels like an urge to pray or couldn't sleep or just knew. And I feel a little jealous of those stories because that's not my story. I have felt a premonition or like an urge to pray for others, but not this. And so the day that he died, and he had apparently already died, I remember I was watching my two oldest grandkids who were 8 and 7 at the time. But they had gone to Home Depot with their grandpa, my husband. And I was out for a walk, having a great chat on my cell phone to a friend of mine, talking about one of my daughters and something that they were going through. Nowhere was it on my radar. We lived in a small town in Washington State, just on the U.S.-Canada border, and our son lived on the Canadian side, and we lived just in the American side. And so the police on both sides, I guess, coordinate with things like this. And the American police, even though he died in Canada, had been by our home and left a card on the front door. No one was home at that moment. And we didn't see it because we went in through the garage. So while our son died at about 5:00 in the morning, the coroner said, it was 4:00 in the afternoon when we received a phone call from a constable in Canada. And he called my cell phone and he said, "Is your husband there?" And I said, "Yes. Would you like to talk to him?" It's always a little serious if the police are calling. And he said that it was concerning our son and could we come to the police station in Canada? And because we had the other two grandkids, my husband said, "Well, do we really need to bring our grandkids along? Does my wife really need to come? It's quite inconvenient." Again, nowhere on our radar either my husband or I, are we thinking that our son has passed? We're thinking that maybe he was in an accident, or worst case scenario, like maybe could he have been drinking and now like we just couldn't imagine.
Right. Yeah.
But not death. And so my husband went, and our daughter-in-law had received strict instructions from the police not to tell me that she needed to wait until we were contacted, but she did not. So I heard it from a phone call from her while my husband wasn't home. And I hit the floor, and I was watching the grandkids, and I was alone. And it's just like that. The world drops out from under you. Of course, it wasn't too long before my husband came home, and we had we held each other, and we had the just gut-wrenching cries together. But I'm thankful that we were together.
Man.
Yeah. And then before we started, and I think this was, I am lucky to have an incredibly godly husband. And I think this was a God moment and something that really saved me through my grief process. So maybe we can already begin to see God at work through a tragedy that clearly is not God's will. And that was my husband grabbed my shoulders, and he looked me straight in the eyes. And he very, very seriously said, "Anne, we will not go down the road of could've, would've, and should've. We will not blame ourselves, and we will not blame other people." And it was just so powerful. And those words really saved me in the grieving process, because whenever my mind would start to go that way, it was like I could hear those words ringing in my ears. And I think that when we start blaming ourselves, when we start blaming other people, when we start trying to think like, what could I have done? It's just, I think my husband is right that, no one knows these things. And it's not, sure, if you can learn something from an experience, that's valuable. But for the most part, we wouldn't be in this situation if you could do something differently.
Right. Mm. Yeah, there's no preparing for that, especially as a mother.
No.
And I'm assuming too, losing a child, no matter in what way, right? But in yours in particular, a very devastating way, right? Yeah. It's hard to comprehend as a mother myself.
Yeah,
right.
It's hard to comprehend. In fact, your hesitation there makes me think of something that might be valuable for people to hear, because it overlaps with, well, how do you help somebody going through this? My favorite cards and emails that I received from people, or people coming alongside, was when they would simply say, "I have no words." There's just no words. And for some reason that was comforting, because that's the truth. There are no words.
Right, Anne, because what do you say, right? And I mean, I would obviously love for you to speak into that, right? As a mom, but as a woman and as a parent, right? Like, what does that look like to speak in to someone, another mother, right, who has lost a child, right? And, in this instance, right, we're preparing for Mother's Day and talking about this many times, right, beautiful holiday, right, which is so wonderful. And it is a moment, right, to pause and to celebrate mothers. But, right, many mothers are grieving, right, so desperately. Some maybe from a loss of a child, right, but for many other reasons also. So how would you encourage other women, in particular mothers, right, in their grief journey as they're walking through this, right? Because you lost your son as an adult, correct?
Yes, he was just shy of his 32nd birthday.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
How would I encourage other mothers that are going through this? So An interesting thing in my life is that when I lost our son, I was in my 50s, so I had a lot of life experience. And while I had never dealt with death before, I had dealt with grief in a different way. In fact, my work in helping marriages that are in crisis is in many ways walking people through a grief journey because their marriage as they've known it has died, because there's been infidelity and the purity of their marriage is gone, and you don't get that back, like the affair doesn't unhappen. Oh. And so they grieve what they have lost. And so, first of all, I will say that through the body of Christ, our church, our friends, and even a lot of our clients actually, they were amazing. We really had good people in our lives. And so I remember some of the first things that those in the inner circle, they said, anything at all you need, anything we can do to help, just let us know and we'll do that. And so I think the first thing that I did right on the journey was actually ask for that help, because I knew those people really meant it. And that would be my encouragement. Take the help. The things I asked for, I mean, I was watching my grandchildren and my daughter, their mom was she's like, Mom, I can't. She was falling apart. I can't take the kids
who lost
back.
her brother. Mm-hmm.
The sister who lost the brother says, I can't watch my kids.
It wasn't just you grieving, Anne, right? It's your husband grieving and your daughters. And I'm assuming, right, even your grandchildren would recognize that also.
And from what I know of grieving, I also knew that this was not the time for me to be a superhero. This was a time for me to acknowledge that I was weak and to allow people to step in and help me. And so I remember I called this lady from our church that had said this, and we were not that close. I would put her more in acquaintance category, but she said, anything at all I can do to help. I really mean that. So I'm like, did you really mean that you would do anything? She said, yes. And I said, well, what I really need is a babysitter, because I got my 2 grandkids here and my daughter won't take her kids back. And we have to go to the funeral home. This is 2 days later to plan the funeral. And can you come and be with them? She showed up and she had games and she thought of everything. She stopped at the store and bought like kid-friendly food because she didn't know what I would have in the house. So just in case she made sure. But it's humbling to ask someone you don't know very well. And then the first time my husband had to leave on an errand and I was alone after getting the news, I found myself just hyperventilating, sitting on the floor and just, and it was like I wasn't okay. I remember I called my husband. I said, how long did you say? And so he was back as soon as possible. But when he got home, I said, we're going to need to discuss who we could handle being in our space, because I can't handle being alone. And I know that we have things to do, so you can't be here every minute. And so we talked about it, and I called another friend who was quite close, and I said, I need you to actually kind of move in with me now. Anne. And so she came and took care of me. I remember she showed up, she made a rhubarb crisp, and she decided I needed to eat. She poured cream on it. She's a little bossy. Here, eat this. But I did need to eat something. And the heaviness of that actually helped me to sleep. And I did need to sleep. And so, and then there was all the greeting cards. But people, I have to acknowledge, people grieve differently.
Very much so.
Weird thing, the small neighborhood we were living in, there was 2 other women who had lost sons. And I remember, so one of the things that really helped my husband and I was the greeting cards. And there were hundreds that would come. There were so many.
Hundreds?
I would say.
Oh my goodness, Anne.
But We would every day go to the mailbox, and there'd be like 5 or 6 cards. And then we would sit on the couch together and we would read every word that was written. And we were greatly encouraged. It's love. God was showing his love to us through the people. And I knew that's what it was. And so just allowing myself to be loved, and we rose up on that love. Whereas my neighbor had said, oh, don't you find it awful opening all those cards? So people are different.
Yes, very much so.
And I guess you maybe have to ask people.
So what I hear from you, Anne, right, is a lot of acts of service, right? People just stepping into your needs, right? Some of them known, some of them not known, right? Words of affirmation and encouragement, right? Like, those are, very practical ways, right, to love.
Yeah. And for the inner circle of friends to show up and be there. I remember sitting with a couple of pastors and with a couple of close friends and with their daughters and the daughter-in-law, and how they, coached us through those things. And I'm just forever grateful for, them showing up. And the funeral, people traveled far to be there. And I gained a whole new appreciation for the military, because our son was in the military. So there was like 400 people that actually showed up.
Oh my.
And a lot of it was military, and they went above and beyond. And I guess as a mom, when you see all those people, it says they care, and that your son was loved, and you just really want him to be loved and not forgotten.
Yes.
And so showing up and not needing to say anything. And the acts of service. And there was one person, a friend, that started a GoFundMe account, and it's a humbling thing, but it was really helpful to have help with money to cover funeral costs.
I'm sure.
And also that we took time off work. And so it was a real help. But again, I received it as incredible love, and it really helped through the grieving process.
So you would tell then other mothers, right, take the time, right? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Allow yourself to grieve. You know what? In the Old Testament, when you lost somebody, you would put on sackcloth and ashes and you would grieve. I think we have mental health issues today in our world because people don't grieve. And the Jewish people, they know to sit Shiva and grieve. So I say, give yourself some time off, if at all possible. Maybe somebody's circumstances you can't.
Right.
But we had our own business, and we just were like, I don't know what's going to happen financially, but I can't work. So I'm assuming you saw the Lord provide, right? And he did.
Yeah. And you just trusted that even in your grief, right, he would show up, and the community around you, right?
Yes.
Did that, right? They were Jesus to you, and in the hands and feet in a lot of ways when you could do it yourself.
Yeah. People say often, if God is real, I need God with skin on. Well, those people are God with skin on. It is God who is leading them. And I remember we were not able, so we do marriage seminars, and we had people registered, one that was a month later and one that was, he died on May 13th, and it was in July. And it was a seminar that I do for betrayed women. And I had more mentors, like my team, than ever before. And my husband and I have done seminars in Australia. So I even have a team member, a mentor friend from Australia. She showed up in the United States for the July seminar to have my back and to be there and to be strong for me. There was 8 women that showed up from, Canada, the US, and my Australian friend. So, and they were just wonderful. They were just there. They were just there.
Isn't that amazing, Anne? Right, there's the one side, right, that you're talking about, right, of needing that encouragement, right, words of affirmation, service, right, watching your grandkids. But there's a whole other side of it, right? Just your presence right there. I think you said this maybe off camera or off audio, right? Earlier we were talking and you said, or maybe it was earlier, right? Like they didn't have words and there was nothing to say. And that encouraged my heart because I didn't have anything to say, right? It's just the idea that there's another body next to you, right? Like that is present with you in that moment, that's recognizing and seeing you in your hurt and not forcing you to move past it. Right. Just allowing you to be for a minute, to feel it and not be ashamed. We were talking about that also. Yeah. Right. The shame that can come right from this as a parent and the fear, right, that you can feel in not wanting to talk about it. Right. But you as a mom, right, you want to talk about your beautiful child and the beautiful life that they lived. Yeah. Right. And I can imagine, and that's another question I'd love for you to speak into is what does Mother's Day look like for you, right? As each year passes, right, from your son dying, right? How is it taken on new meaning, both in the positive maybe and the negative, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So Mother's Day has always been a little bit challenging in my life from the very first Mother's Day when I was 5 months pregnant. And we went to church and the pastor asked all of the mothers to stand so he could pray for them. And my husband gently tugged at my dress and said, "Sit down, you're not a mother." So
no.
That didn't go well.
That is not a tip for any men, right? Listening.
It's a tip. This is what not to do.
What not to do. Oh my goodness.
So, so that was that. And the weird thing for me is that I have two of the biggest tragedies that I've lived through in my life. And one of them is losing my son. And the other one was the day that I found out that my husband had been unfaithful to me. And that was 18 years into our marriage. And that day was the day after Mother's Day. So Mother's Day had always been kind of a trigger for me. And I had moved beyond. So I don't know, you can laugh at me or whatever, but sometimes I look up and I go it's like two bookends, the day before and the day after. So I kind of think the day that I get to graduate and see the Lord will probably be Mother's Day. That's my thoughts. But
maybe the Lord will come full circle for you.
Yeah. So I like to keep the day that my son died as I don't work on that day. It falls on a different day of the week every year, but I like to acknowledge it. But if it falls right on Mother's Day, I will take, which has only been last year, it's been 7 years since he died. So I will set aside a little bit of time to remember him because that comforts me. And I love it if my daughters, sit with me, and my husband will always, sit with me. And obviously he has his own grief journey. And we can maybe also talk about the difference between the way moms and dads grieve, because that's a thing. But what has hit me is that my grandsons, especially the ones here, Oscar was born after Dustin died. So any of the other ones are too young. So at best, they're going to know I had an Uncle Dustin, he died. So I believe, and this is maybe my encouragement to mothers, that Mother's Day is actually not so much for the mom. I know we kind of wish it was, but I think it's a day where children and husbands are taught and learn how to honor their mothers and their grandmothers. I think it's a day of learning how important it is to honor your mother. And so if that's the case, then we as moms need to receive that honor. And maybe we even have a part to play in teaching children how to honor us. And so it's not all about us. It's about our children learning what's right because they need to honor us. So when my grandchildren come over on Mother's Day, do I want them to be like, yeah, my grandma, she's so sad always on Mother's Day because I guess I had an Uncle Dustin that died. It's kind of a bummer, but I better go. No, that's not teaching them to honor me. I want them to remember, like, I loved going to see my grandma every day, and my grandma was always in a good mood, and she loved to see me, and it was always such a great experience, and I couldn't wait to get there. I remember Mother's Day when I used to make my grandma a card, and she would always be so excited about it, and she would put it up on the refrigerator. See,
Right.
that's what I want. So that encourages me. Like, I'm not going to allow myself to stay in that bad space. Besides, that's not what my son would want. Right? He would end the, because you ask yourself, like, part of you doesn't, there is a part of you that goes like, you're discouraged and you maybe have a hard time. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to pick up the pieces and live. It's like, what? And you can go through the like, well, what's the point if God's going to allow this to happen, in my life? But I think that we need to just accept God's sovereignty and to realize that if we're still here, the Lord doesn't want us living depressed. He wants us to be brave, a grieving time, but not to stay there for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And one of the things I had to do when enough time had gone by was I had to give myself permission to be happy. It's almost like you think, if I'm happy, somebody will think I didn't love my son that much.
Or that you forgot, but a mother never forgets.
A mother never forgets. No, somebody once said it's like losing a limb. And I thought, what a great metaphor.
And why is that, Anne?
Because if
For
you
you,
lost
maybe in particular,
a limb, you could still do your life quite successfully, but you would always be aware that part of you was missing in that way.
I'm trying to imagine, right? Like losing a leg, like you always walk with a limp, right? Or, right? Like it's the ghost of something that once was there and a huge part of you attached to you, right?
Yeah. But you could still laugh and you could still show up at a party and God could still use you to minister to somebody and your life could still have a tremendous purpose. You might need a little retraining of how to get to that.
Yeah, physical therapy, right? Or talking with the Lord, right? Yeah, talking with girlfriends.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, being in counseling, talking with the pastor. I mean, right, all the things that you've already like alluded to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot, Anne.
So one of the things that has really encouraged me is the story of Job. So when you think about it, Job lost his kids, he lost his wealth, he lost his health, and
everything.
And yet, and nobody really understood why. Job didn't understand why. God knew why, Satan knew why, but the people did not know why. And at first, Job's friends show up. And for the first week, they get it right because they sit there and they say nothing. And then they start talking and it's all downhill from there. And all this talking and trying to figure out why it's happening, and which I think is one of the important things is that don't try to give explanations. That is not helpful. But anyways, at the end of all that sharing, God shows up at the end and he says, were you there when I created the world? Were you there when I made the Leviathan? Were you there when I did this? Were you there when I did that? And the basic message is God is sovereign and there is always a bigger picture and we don't understand that picture. And when, let's face it, when a parent loses a child, it's just wrong. It's wrong. It's backwards.
It shouldn't be this way.
It should not be this way. And I don't think there are certain tragedies that we won't have really an explanation for on this side of eternity. And I don't want to try to put a pretty bow on this for any mom that is grieving the loss of a child.
Because there is no pretty bow, Anne.
There is no pretty bow. I have to live bravely every day without my son. And I think about him every day. So that's important.
So, Anne, as you were talking about that, elaborate and just share as you've walked through your pain and your grief journey, how have you seen the Lord work, right? How have you seen his goodness? What have you learned about him and his nature, right? Like, I loved how you were elaborating, right? And sharing just, you ask questions, right? And you're like, God, why? And you wrestle with those things. So what have you learned about the nature and character of God through this journey?
And that's, in some ways, it's kind of a tough question because I'd been through so much life before that I feel like, was it new for me? Maybe not, but reinforced even more so. Like, God has got this. God is good. He is really, really good. And he always has a good plan for us. And there's always like, we might not understand it. We might not see anything good. Can I see anything good in that my son died? Not really. And the best I can come up with is like, oh, he didn't have to live through COVID. That's not really much, right? But I trust God, and he's been there. He's been there through our friends, and I've drawn closer to him, and he's drawn closer to me. I believe that it's in the times of suffering that God really shows you who he is. And I believe it's an opportunity to embrace him in a better way. I think many times we have dreams of how we think our lives should be. And God is showing us through the suffering and the tragedy that the best thing is when he shows up in our lives, that there's a joy in him that's inexplicable, the knowing of him. And I will say, how am I different since, this has happened? Well, I would say I'm fearless for one thing, because the worst has already happened. So what is exactly left to be afraid of? And, you could think about, like, what are the worst funerals to go to? Well, when an older person dies that's lived a long, good life, you can celebrate that. If it's, a spouse, that's really hard. Those are hard funerals, I've heard pastors say. If it's something tragic like a murder, that's a hard funeral. Or a young person, but the hardest funerals are the funeral of a child. And something that sometimes is even hard for me to say, but I want to face this, and I want people to know, is that our son had taken his own life. It was a suicide. And that seems like such an ugly thing, even farther than that tragedy. And that's, I believe, the hardest funeral of all. And so I've been through the hardest, and God has been there with me. And because of who he is and how he's showed up in my life before this ever happened, I trust him. And I know that, this is what he does. And so we go through all the stages. We go through the shock. We go through the sorrow. We go through the struggle and the asking the questions of why. And then at the end of the day, we have to surrender it, surrender and trust God. I do know that also as Christians, as it says, we do not grieve like people who have no hope. And I was there when my son, was a young teenager and he was baptized in front of the church. And, I was there when we prayed together and he was a little boy and he gave his life to Christ. And so, what a hope. He's not dead.
Amen.
He's graduated. and I'm going to see him again.
Praise the Lord.
And it might not, it might feel long while I'm down here, but it really won't be long, because our lives are but fleeting, the word says, in light of eternity. And so there's a tremendous comfort in knowing that he's with Jesus and that I will see him again.
Oh, Anne.
Yeah.
That is so beautiful. Yeah, there are no words, right?
No.
Like, as you just, I feel like even just sitting here getting to listen and have this conversation in person is, it's weighty, right? It's heavy. And I'm really grateful that you were so kind and vulnerable to take a moment to share, not just with me, but right, to many women out there, right? And hopefully men and too, and other parents, right, walking this journey and what it looks like to look for the Lord, look for Jesus, and look for the hope, right, of heaven in moments, especially like yours, right, where the shame wants to come over you and tell you, right, that you should get past it, right? Or you should be ashamed, right? But that's not what the Lord wants for us, right? Like what you said, I love that. Like I feel fearless, right? But that again, you're a seasoned mom, right? And I'm assuming too, right? And a seasoned believer, right?
Yes.
And is there any encouragement maybe as we wrap up that you would have for maybe a younger believer who's walking this journey? And right, it sounds like a lot of instances of casting your mind on remembrances, right, of the goodness of the Lord. Do you have any encouragement for someone like in the early stages of that and in their early walks with Jesus, what that might look like or manifest itself in?
Yeah, my fear for a younger Christian or somebody that's not rooted in this is that it might cause you to start doubting God and go down that road of like, if God is a loving God, how could he allow this to happen to me? And I just want to encourage you to really get to receive the help that I am confident will be offered to you. Don't allow yourself to get into a cynical place because this pain is not going to go away in that way. And you might not be able to feel it, but God is there with you. And maybe I'll just share what I would say to you is because this comes from my other grief story, the grief with my marriage. But it was interesting after my husband and I had healed our marriage and things were together again. I had this experience where I felt that the Lord left me, but the Lord was right beside me. But it was a literal experience, like I could feel something, like something spiritual happened. And yeah, at first I was afraid to tell anyone, but I did tell one of my closest Christian friends. I'm like, I had this really weird experience. It felt kind of like God left me, but he was right there with me. And she goes, oh, that makes total sense. I'm like, what do you mean?
What do you mean?
Total sense. And she said, no, she said, you were so broken. You couldn't walk. So spiritually, God scooped you up in his arms. He was carrying you. But you were so broken that you were just surviving one day at a time. You couldn't even really feel that. But when you were healed, you could walk on your own again. And so he just puts you down, but he was right there. And you would feel that. And that's what I would say. You might not feel it, but I can assure you without a shadow of a doubt that God is there and he sees every teardrop and this will not go wasted. And he wants to take your pain and he wants to turn it into words of comfort for others. He wants to turn your mess into a message. He's not going to let it be wasted. Tests become testimonies. And we may not understand on this side, but draw closer to him. And ask the tough questions of seasoned Christians. Go ahead and challenge them because if God is who he says he is, he can be challenged. So,
amen. I love what you said. Like the test turns into a testimony. Like that's what we're talking. I mean, like write your story today. Like, what a gift, Anne. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today. And again, like just for being so open and sharing from such a personal place, but such a hard place. And I genuinely am just praying for the women that are listening to this, that have walked through this, that they feel heard. And just like you said, that they know that the Lord is with them, even just in this conversation, right? Like, I loved that you said, like, you may not feel it because you won't, right? You feel alone, but the Lord is always there. And I'm just really glad that we were able to have this conversation today and have you join us. And I'm just glad that we have been able to talk so frankly and honestly, and in a way I hope that reflects the goodness of who the Lord is, and even in the hard parts of motherhood. I'm just really grateful. Thank you so much, Anne.
And I'm grateful to be here. There is one thing I forgot to say.
Please.
Do we have an extra minute?
Yes.
I just think this is really important, and that is that moms and dads grieve differently. And the truth of the matter is that many couples end up divorced after losing a child. And that's not our story in my marriage, because my husband and I understood this. And for example, when I took that time off work initially, I remember that my husband had a private intensive booked with a couple, and he told them that I would not be able to do it, but that he would like to still do it with them. And he flew to Los Angeles and worked with this couple for 3 days. It was probably about a week after our son had died. And if I didn't understand that we grieve differently, I would have judged him. And I would have said, I can't believe he's working. He must not love our son enough. But I knew that men and women grieve differently. And my husband needed that space, a little distraction to cope with all that he was coping with, because he had to manage myself and our daughter-in-law and my 2 daughters, his 2 daughters. So, and in a different way, something that I did afterwards to comfort myself was to watch the slideshow of my son's life, our son's life, every day for many months. Every morning I'd watch it. And I remember one day my husband walked in and he's like, "Are you sure that's really good for you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm very sure." And he allowed me to grieve the way that I needed to grieve. So just be aware that people grieve differently, and give each other space for that. So,
well, not just moms and dads, right? But I mean, even in this instance, what we're talking about, other moms, right? Like, certain women are extroverted, right? And need that time with people, but others may be introverted and need to be alone, right? Like journaling that's a very good note, right? To remember, especially because all of us are different. Like, the Lord has made us different, and there's no prescription, right, for how to walk through this, right? Which is why we share these stories, right? And
exactly. So to the ones grieving, I would say, tell people what you do and don't need, because they love you and they want to support you. So make it easy for them and be honest and tell them, I want you to come over. I don't want you to come over, whatever it is.
Yes.
So anyways, thank you for having me.
Oh, that was so good.
I hope many will be encouraged.
I'm encouraged. Good. I feel like, right there, you can't walk away from listening or having a conversation like this without being reminded, right, to look for the good, right, even in the hard, right, to look for the Lord and the light, and even in the darkness, right, to know that God is still pursuing us, even in the wilderness, right? Even in our moments of desperation, that He's still there, and that He still wants to be known, right? And He makes His presence known. We just have to sometimes dig hard, right? When we're clouded, right, by our own grief, right, or our own sadness. And I think your story today is just reminding me that He shows up, right? Like, in small ways, in big ways, and He's in the details, and He cares, and He's intentional about that. And that we as sisters in Christ, and we need to remember and encourage one another, right? That the Lord is seeking us. And I feel like that's why it's important to have this conversation, right? Is no one is alone, right? No one is alone in their story or in their grief, or in their hurt, right? And that's what this is part of, right? Is allowing men and women and believers alike, right, to be seen in their hurt. And how do we keep fighting for hope, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, at the end of the
right.
day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anne. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kelcey, for having me.
We hope you feel seen and encouraged by this conversation today and by whatever journey you see yourself on this upcoming Mother's Day. If you are listening today and this content has touched your heart in some way and you'd like to talk to someone or have more questions for one of our guests, we would love to connect with you at women@ubcbeavercreek.com. Again, we're so grateful you're here and thank you for joining us for this mini-series honoring Mother's Day. We pray this has deepened your desire to know Jesus and remember that He too desires to know you. We'll see you next time.